recording and transcription. I don't want transcription. Uh, yeah, you recorded and transcribed. Okay. Okay. So today, what we need to talk, what we intended that we want to talk about was constructing good interactive figures. My favorite topic from all the research where everything comes together in a nice figure, no? And what I would like to do is I would like to share my screen. Um, yeah, so we can see this screen, huh? Can we?
Yes.
Yes.
Super, super, super. So this was my first article where it was an aha moment. Okay, so this is how you represent a complicated data set in an interesting way, and you build your story around it. So this is where basically so this was the work which I did back in Pakistan, but it got so it was rejected by 2 or 3 journals. And then when I was here in Germany, we did a few more simulations in the very beginning because of some of the reviewer comments, and eventually this article got accepted and then published. And this is where I came across presenting complicated data sets and so on. So we have already discussed the different parts of an article and what to write there and how we can consistently log data in and things like this. Once we are doing it now, then it becomes quite important to understand the story which we want to tell and how do we want to tell it. And this is where, for example, we will just quickly see things here, not really nice figures. So these are, so usually this is how I would present data in the past. So these are all different graphs for different material properties, and you will see that they are given in different subplots. And then, for example, this was the figure which we had to construct to make sure that the message gets through. And we will see here that the mesh on the crack tip was quite small. And but we also wanted to show the overall geometry and how things are happening here. And therefore we showed that the thermocouples experimentally were attached here, the temperature curves are here. Of course, now you can see that the text size in this figure is not too nice and not very readable. So whenever I look at this article, I see, okay, so this is where I started. and and then, for example, we see that how we define that this is the wedge surface, because then we can see it, and this is where we were defining different attributes and properties. And then we zoomed into this area and showed it as a separate figure here, plotted because it is 3D, so we cannot see in depth. So then I had to construct this as a crack front to show, okay, the crack is 3D and it is distributed in the wedge like this. So it was a lot of construction, labeling, and things like this. But this was the first time I had to represent such a complicated thing, and I was able to show it with the help of this sketch. And while I was constructing this sketch, the story in your head or in the mind gets stronger and stronger. And the idea with that is that it becomes much easier to write. So, for example, now I see that the caption of the figure is not very captivating or not very inclusive, which certainly can be improved. So you can see that this was the first attempt, or when I was beginning to write the article, so how we were dealing with several things. But yeah, so then this figure basically tells the whole story of how this crack is defined, how the boundary conditions are defined, and once it is constructed, it becomes much easier to make a story around it. And then once I was able to construct this figure and get it approved from my supervisor, and after a few suggestions, and again, this is not the final version, so this is the final version, but it is not the first version which you started constructing. So the first construction was really bad. It was really hard to show it as a separate figure here. We tried making different lines or doing different things, but eventually we came out to this. And then I later in this whole article you will not see huge constructions, but at least you will see some construction. So instead of just saying that this curve is obtained from there and this curve is obtained from there, I snapped some pictures from the simulation curves and showed that, okay, this is on the tip and this is on the surface in the middle. And it is much easier to visualize where this data is taken from. And so and so and so we will see a lot of constructions here. So for example, this is the curve with time, and then we are only taking data here at this tip, and we are constructing this graph using that. And I used this kind of method and technique at several. For example, here you will say, here you will see plastic strain distribution on different paths, but I'm not only saying on the surface and in the middle. We are showing it visually here because it was 3D, a relatively complicated, but yeah, we are plotting it at two different positions, not on every plane, and we are showing it here. So there were several ways of writing the article. The first version of the article was very rough. We had to explain a lot of things in the text, and still they were ambiguous, probably because of that it was rejected several times. But then eventually we came across this idea of showing it visually, making things more clear for the readers, and then it also becomes much easier to explain these things in the text as well if the figures are appropriately constructed. And that is what we did here. And I realized that it was super hard to explain something in text when the figures were just figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4, figure 5, figure 6. And then you say that, as you see in figure 6b, the data on the outer line is shown in figure 12c, and so and so on. But if the figure is nicely constructed, everything is there, you are pointing out the arrows, then it becomes much easier to say this data is on the surface, which is this much percent lower than the data which is in the middle, and so and so. And then, yeah, so this was the first article. For example, this is a picture taken from literature, and this and we then we constructed it to explain a point which you wanted to make in the text, that as we go far from the center of the wedge, the cracks become shorter. And why is that so, and why numerical simulation is important, and what we learn from there, and then some 3D graphs, and yeah, eventually the conclusions. So this was, and since then I have always tried to, once the idea of the article is established, so we have done enough research, we have enough data collected, what I always intend to do is show that data nicely in the form of a story, as figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4, which are nicely constructed, which each individual figure tells a complete story, so we don't have to refer to other figures during explanation. If and when we are constructing those figures, or themselves by ourselves or with the help of other people, we are discussing things on what we want to show and how we want to show it and what is the significance, and that is the data which we actually want to write in the form of text. So the explanation of the figures becomes much easier with the constructed figures. So this is where I would say that I began. And then I would like to share a more complicated challenge here, which we did with a recent article which got accepted. So you can see here some of the figures which we constructed for our recent article. So it was with the help. So we wanted to. It was an extensive methodology here, what we did and how we reached our results, and we realized that writing 5 or 6 long paragraphs about it was difficult to follow. So in the end, before we submitted the article, we constructed this flow chart and added it to the methodology section, which helped us explain things much easier. And we also believe that it would become much easier for the readers to go through the whole process. If they do not really want to go through all those 2 pages of text, they can just quickly go through this figure and realize, okay, oh, this is what they did, and these are the important points which they mentioned, and they can move on with looking at the results section, which is more important for them. And then, for example, this figure is not super special, but of course you will see that the symmetry and the presence of the position, the presence of everything, and then the large text sizes and styles is everything, which makes it more clear and more understandable. So this is the data set which we used. So this was the figure which we constructed before, and then this was the second version. And this was also not the last version, but after a few iterations. And then, for example, we start from here. So we want to focus on different zones here. And in the caption, we mentioned these zones are where the cementite particles are clustered. And we are showing here that the red are the cementite particles, the black are the grain boundaries, and then the areas with the cementite particle concentrations. And again, we are showing here this IPF map. And then we are also showing the orientation distribution throughout. But again, the more important thing is, because we ran simulation on this, it is relatively difficult to follow what is happening through this area. So we magnified it, zoomed into it, and showed what is here. And now you can understand, if you work with this kind of data set, which most of us do, you will understand that this data is extracted from several different sources, but it was hard to show a meaningful image out of it by putting it in different figures. So we had to find a way to construct it in a nice way so it tells a story. And then, of course, the particle distribution and particle sizes. And then this is basically these are our simulation results, where we again showed a little bit of the IPF colors here, but again drew the orientation of the crystals on top of them, which would help us explain things much better. And then also here, the distribution of phases and the grain boundaries, which would help us explain the things better, which is happening. So what is happening in these figures? So these are the global figures. And then to explain different phenomena happening, we extracted data on different lines, plotted them in the graphs, took these orientations from those specific particles, and then placed them here, constructed that this is where the grain boundary is, and then named them so it becomes much easier to follow when we are writing in the text. So at position 1 in figure this, so what is happening, and so and so. And yeah, so if you will look at this figure, there is a lot happening here. But when we write it in text, it becomes much easier to explain each phenomena, which would be difficult if we wanted to put this data in separate figures or construct it in a way that it is not really connected. So again, for other RVEs, we did the same and constructed similar figures. So the methodology more or less remains the same. Once you understand how the authors are explaining things, it becomes much easier to do it. And yeah, in the end, we constructed some probability distribution functions and cumulative distribution functions and compared them as well. So these are relatively much easier figures to follow. But yeah, this was really hard. This data set of explaining things by connecting everything all together in a way that it conveys a meaningful purpose, yet everybody can clearly explain, everybody can clearly see what is happening at a magnified place, and with the overlay of grain boundaries and then so and so. It was relatively tricky. So this was the hardest part, but once the figures were constructed, then it became much easier to write a story around it. So that is why I like this point so much. And this is where a new person who is coming in on explaining things in an interactive way lags, I feel. So we usually think that doing an experiment or a simulation or doing a research is important. But once we have data, we will just put it in a document, and then we will write around it, is something which I was missing for quite some time, and then later realized that no, post-processing the data takes so much. So now I know that if it will take 3 months for me to do some simulations. It will take 6 months for me to only post process their data, construct nice figures, and then eventually write text around it. So present it nicely in a meaningful way, so that anybody can follow the work and easily understand that. Now, yeah. So that is what I wanted to say. I would stop sharing this now, and yeah. So I feel that, again, to sum it up, I feel that um, understanding the data which we want to send an image, understanding the set of data which we want to represent, and then constructing it in a meaningful way does 50% of the job when we want to actually write about it, rather than just throwing in images and trying to make a complicated story out of them. Even if we are able to do that, it becomes super difficult for editors and reviewers, and even if it goes through that process, then for the readers to follow, and the research gets less traction. And I feel that is also one difference in when we see really nice articles published which are super easy to understand yet are scientifically challenging to do, that the people spend so much time in post processing the data and presenting it in a meaningful way. So yeah, that was from my side.
Yeah, honestly, I thought about that topic as well. I don't know, I can share my screen, so I made 2 screenshots and send it to the chat, because I started to think about how to visualize something, and maybe that fits perfectly into that discussion today, because in your paper I've seen just numbers, and I don't know if that way of visualizing things is for you understandable, and maybe if it does it help to bring text within the images, or should I just use numbers, something like that? Or I don't know, because I thought about zooming in. I think metalographic pictures are predestinated predestinated for zooming in or showing details, and I thought about how to visualize that by making an arrow on it, or making a number, making a zoom in or something like that. And I that those 2 pictures had been my first approaches. I don't know what you think about these two. Should I better use numbers, or zoom out, just like you show the picture and then 2 lines and then the zoom picture? I don't know. What do you think about those two?
Let me explain what, for example, when I show you the figures with only numbers and not really some text in it. Now, the idea then is that because the picture then becomes super cluttery, so there is a lot of data and a lot of text in it, it becomes hard to follow what is going where when already too much is happening. So what we usually do is we just define clear numbers or some nomenclature to point out those things, and then write everything about them in the figure caption,
In
rather
the
than,
caption.
yeah, so rather than putting all the text in the figure. But for example, for your figure, for both figures, because there is not a lot happening, it is also convenient to put text there, so anybody who is looking at the figure, if the text is not hindering anything, it is very clear. And yeah, so then this is okay and convenient. But for example, if you're looking at 20 different zones, and then you're always writing, this is a particle, this is a particle, this is a particle, this is a particle, it is much easier to put aesthetics or arrows there, for example, with cracks or certain things, and then you write in the caption, white arrows represent these areas, black arrows represent these areas, and then picture becomes less cluttery, yet everything is explained in the caption. So this is what we did with these figures now. So when we are writing a lot of numbers and there is a lot happening there, of course, we are not labeling it and mentioning it clearly. That is what we are mentioning in the captions. And as you saw in the first article when we started constructing the figures, we again wrote a lot in the figures and the caption was really 4 words. So yeah.
So you would then maybe put numbers and arrows in the picture itself and then write and explain it in the caption, or
Yeah.
would you also explain the numbers within the text and then
Yeah.
don't
For
go. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So for example, if there are zones now, or for example, if there are different zones in your picture, I would say if I would label them A, B, C, it
Mhm.
becomes much easier to write about them in the caption, as well as it becomes much easier to explain them in the article body or the text body that
Mhm.
um, so when this happens, this appears in around the particle. So you can see it in figure 7 zone A.
Mhm.
But if figure 7 zone A is not defined there, you have written text there, then how will you address that in the text?
Mhm.
So then
So
you have to find another way around it now.
yeah. So all the numbers in the picture should be within the caption as well, and then
Yes.
afterwards in the text as well.
But in the text, they are used basically to explain the phenomena,
Okay.
what you want to do.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
in the caption, they are basically to clarify what is where.
Okay. Okay.
So
Yeah.
and then one good practice which we usually say is a picture stand alone should be self-explanatory
Mhm.
with the figure. So if there is A, B, C, a lot is happening, the caption should be long enough. Even if it is repeating some text from the article body, it should be
Mhm.
long enough that if a person only looks at the figure and reads the caption, should be able to completely understand what is happening in the picture, rather
Yeah.
than finding, okay, where it is cited, what is written about this figure. I don't know what this yellow is or what this black is. I want to know about this, and then I have to go to it should not happen. The
Mhm.
picture standalone should be explaining itself.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, that helps a lot because I also thought about that topic and that two pictures maybe
Mhm.
fit into that discussion because I just started to write the text inside of the picture, but the numbers and explaining them within the caption would be, I think,
Yeah.
the
So it is
smoothest
relatively,
solution.
yes, so it is relatively neat, and you can always refer to it at multiple positions. But if
Yeah,
you have directly written text there, then how will you tell someone in the second page or the last page to look at that figure at that place?
yeah, you're
Because
right.
then there is no place there.
Yeah, yeah,
But
then
the
you
figure,
can
but the
just.
figure is more interactive. So this kind of construction is generally used in presentations,
Mhm.
but where you cannot write A and then explain it somewhere else. But it becomes much easier to write to have a system of mentioning areas and zones, and then using that throughout the document.
Yeah, yeah. Then you can make the reference back and just say
Yes.
in picture figure 3C you can see and so on.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But this is a good start. So once you know this, then you can move to the next step. If
yeah,
you just start with defining zones, zooming in things, again, step by step.
yeah, yeah.
And once you have this data, then you know, okay, then I want to basically, for example, I see that you have written text in 3 areas in the first picture, and then I know, okay, this is precisely the text I would move in the caption. So I don't have to repeat or think what I wanted to write, but I will just mention ABC here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I will make another version of it, and
Mm.
I think that will
Yeah.
be
But
self-explanatory.
anyways, if you would do the work first or last, half work is already done.
Yeah.
So that's the key, no? Interesting.
Same thoughts, huh?
Mm. Yeah. Um, uh, do the other people have experience with constructing figures? And I also feel that it also when you have worked hard on constructing nice figures, and it is much easier to follow what you want to say through text, the acceptance of the articles and the gestures you receive on them also significantly improve. So the editor and the reviewer, if they will just quickly scroll through the article, they cannot deny that you worked really hard and you are really trying to make up a story. and you're just submitting something not well done to the article. So they really go through it. They provide really the hard work you put in really helps others to put in all the hard work and effort and provide you with more important and critical feedback rather than just saying, oh, this article is not good for our journal. So then these kind of comments really get less.
Yeah, what I also really love, those are flow charts. I don't know if they are commonly used, but I really like to use them to show how the process is conducted and which step follows
Yeah.
which, just as the example you showed with the step 1, 2, 3, 4. And I can share this one as well. I don't know, that has been one of my first flow charts, but I think that helps a lot to understand which process follows each other and how they go through it. I don't know, is that common? I don't know. I did not see something like this in materials paper, but I really like it to understand it. So why don't use it?
So basically, you're already explaining. I feel that you're already explaining everything in the methodology section. No? So this is how we did it and what we did and everything, but but that is the section which is also so what I would suggest is always add this in your document, but later the editor might say that we are limited with the space and this is not a very useful figure, so this can be omitted because you're explaining everything in the text, then that can be removed. But if it gets published, for me, if I'm reading the article, I would like to quickly know the methodology, how things went and what steps were followed, and then just directly go to the results section. And if I need some information, I can refer to the methodology section in detail. So I would find this kind of figure helpful, and therefore we started constructing them. And also because our methodology became complicated. So there is an experimentation going on, and then there is simulation going on, and then the data is being shared, but with several assumptions, and it is difficult to explain in text, and it is much easier to explain in the form of a diagram. So how the data flow went and what went where and what happened. So yeah, that helps. But if later the editor or the reviewer can say this figure is not useful, and then that can be easily removed and can be used somewhere else.
Yeah, I also I started to construct them with LaTeX, but I think a friend of mine just told me Microsoft Visio. I don't know if you know that. It's really helpful. So I will have a closer look onto Microsoft Visio. The graphs he made have really nicely, and I will have a closer look on that. Maybe I can share something of that as well in later sessions.
Yeah, and when we talk about construction figures, do others also do constructions, and when they do, how you do it? So when we are coming to the tools, that was also some other point which I wanted to mention here, but yeah, okay. You say that you wanted to construct it using LaTeX, and then now you're looking towards Microsoft Visio. Okay.
LaTeX was good. I mean, the figure also is clean, and you can make any distances always the same distances, so that is really easy. But for me, as not a LaTeX pro, it also took quite a long time to get to know how that commands will work, and then you have to click on run it, and it takes a lot of time just always to run and change something and to run and change something. So that circled a lot of time to get to know how it worked. So a visually based tool might be easier and faster to get nice graph out of it. I don't know. Did you make your pictures in PowerPoint and then just the arrows and so on, all in PowerPoint, and then exported them as JPEG?
Yes.
Okay.
So previously I started to use Macromedia Flash. So that is a tool which people usually use to make animations, GIFs. So something is changing a little bit, so they have different layers, and then that can be exported as a video. The advantage there was that it is much easier to construct symmetric lines and geometries, and it has some options now. But then I realized that I was not really using full potential of Macromedia Flash, and then as we have PowerPoint tool, as Mason once mentioned, that we are usually putting our data there, we have some presentations and things like this, so then it becomes much easier to construct figures there. And then I found a way of exporting really high quality figures acceptable for the journals from there. And then when I started using it, my skill also slightly improved, and now I prefer to use PowerPoint.
Yeah, and you can easier reuse it for presentations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, I really like Inkscape.
Mm-hmm.
It's an open source product,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm a little bit a mixture of Microsoft and Linux environment.
Mm-hmm. Uh-huh.
So I really like software which works on both. Yeah, like ecosystems.
Mm-hmm.
And I really like it because you have a very extended way of export functions,
Mm-hmm.
and you can export like PDF, and the text is separate, and you can set it in LaTeX. So it exports like a LaTeX figure, actually, and you can make changes, and it is very nice if you write with LaTeX because the font size, the style, it's the same then, and that's something I really like about. And yeah, like Inkscape as open source product, it's not restricted in any way. And for the pictures, I would really recommend to use PDF as output, because with the JPEG it's a pixel format, and sometimes you get in problems with the resolution. Or at least if you export as a JPEG, make sure you have at least 300 dpi to have in a good quality. This is something I would always recommend. And about the other datas, I like MATLAB, but it's basically because I process my data in there. So I, of course, use the output function there. But there as well, you can use LaTeX as font size setting and export as PDF. So this is usually the way I do it. But I also like PowerPoint for making the things like flowcharts sometimes because they have nice standard.
Pre-built shapes and so on, so no.
But for flowcharts or constructing figures, I really like pen and paper.
Yeah.
So I make a sketch first there and make changes. And when I'm happy with this, I put my paper idea into on the screen, I would say. So this is something, because it's a very, or at least I feel it's a very creative process, and I feel a little bit better, or I like to make colored sketches, or I sometimes use the whiteboard, something like this. So it's my way.
Yeah, that is also something usually what we do during discussions. So during discussions, we do not have PowerPoint open. We only have pen and paper or whiteboard, and we say, okay, we had this data, and then we wanted to, and then we have a quick list of sketches, rough sketches which we use during discussion, and that is something which can be used to construct figures data. But I also feel that it is a nice idea to go to pen and paper first. Yeah, because there you can really, so as we discussed before, we want to make this process least friction, with least friction as possible. And on the pen and paper, you do not have so many things to get distracted. So it is just a pen and a paper, and you quickly put things down, and then there the idea can then from the mind it is actually physically outside, and then that can be put in different tools and softwares. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, and one thing it's a little bit a different topic, but I came across colors in figures, and I found a very nice article or people who think about color blindness and to choose your colors that it's easy to access even if you're colorblind. So like typical red and green combination, something to be avoided if possible. And yeah, maybe it's something you can keep in mind when you select the next time the colors. So the advice, for example, magenta instead of red, and like blue or yellow, because these are easier to distinguish if you have a color blindness.
It's also a good point. I never thought of something like that, but for sure I know how many people over the world are colorblind, but I think there are quite many, and why not thinking about something like that? Yeah, it's just the easy step you have to include, but it helps a lot of people maybe afterwards.
Yeah, interesting.
It's most of the time men.
I don't know. Do you know how many people all over the world in percentage? I don't know. I have no idea. But color blindness. My father has gray star, but I think he sees colors. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure, and it's very different for everybody. So some people have only light problems, and others like I had a friend, he did not see the red cherries on a tree. And yeah, that was a little bit tricky for him. So because he could really not distinguish any kind of red and any kind of green, so it was totally the same for him.
Okay. Yeah, that's heavy. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, but it is a nice point. But while constructing figures, just take care of the color combinations. Is there anything else we want to discuss?
Maybe one thing from last week, I tried Grammarly, so the free version, and the one thing I was really expecting help from was with passive active, and this is something in the pro version.
Yeah, it is. It is in the pro version, but with the active and passive, basically, it for the technical writing, it always suggests that choose a passive voice, no?
Okay.
And it just always does that. And even if I was using a pro version, I turned that option off.
Okay.
Because it is really irritating when the sentence is right, it is conveying a meaningful way. I don't want to overcomplicate the sentence just because it is not correctly. So it is not 100% active and not 100% passive. It is just some words are coming in, and the sentence is making nice sense, but it was still suggesting, according to its filter, that it is not passive. So convert it into that, and yeah, I just turned that off.
Okay.
That's what I said now. So what I felt was that the free version does the job good enough. So there are only 5 or 10% more things which are nice with the pro version, but the free version does most of the things itself.
Yeah, and it already helped when it was a little bit underlined, even if it's suggesting this is the problem, then you can think about the sentence, maybe make a small change on your own experience. And
yes, precisely.
So that's okay, and it's a nice tool
to have on the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, to tell where the full stop should come, where a comma should come, if there should be a thou, should not be a thou, and that's
Yeah.
it. And
So that was a nice tool, and
yeah,
I think I will use it
yeah,
in the future,
yeah,
or right now I do.
yeah. And for example, now my pro version also expired in the beginning of this month. So now I also have the free version, and also I'm not writing many documents. So I with the emails and with the general documents, for example, just writing the abstract or the title, or I do not feel too much difference.
Okay.
And I am happy that most of the options are closed, so I have less things to correct as well. So yeah, it works fine. But for example, when I want to, in the future, I know that when I will have so many documents on my table, I have to go through them very quickly, very fast. Then of course I would prefer that version, so it helps me. So I don't have to really critically go through every sentence to make it perfect. Maybe it can suggest a few things and I can quickly move forward. So in the future, if I will have many documents, maybe I will buy the pro version again. But for now, with all the emails and just the basic documents of 1 2 pages which are easy to go through, this is good enough. Yeah, that's nice. And then the last thing would be, what do we want to discuss for the next week, so the next meeting whenever we have it? How to find an appropriate. So basically there are two things which are mentioned here. One is documents needed and how to submit an article. And I think this is a relatively interesting topic, which also connects with transforming the rough document. So until now, for example, when we are constructing good figures and we already know how to write and then do things, we call it version 0. So it is not the first version, but the very rough initial version. And then what the suggestion is to go through the document critically and then convert it into version 1, which will take some time. There the grammarly comes in, so improving the English, the grammar, the structure of the document, fixing the everything. But then you have version 1, which can be shared with other co-authors or colleagues and for their feedback on what can be done to further improve it. Once we have this version, so while working on this, we also think about what are the qualities of this work, why we did this work, and then when we are formatting it, we are also interested in knowing to which journal we want to submit this work to, because that is how we will prepare our first version or the final version. And that is where what documents are needed and how to submit an article comes in. So I think they both connect appropriately as well at this place, because they both go hand in hand. So, some things which I mentioned in the cover letter are also some highlights, and the figures which we are constructing there and the abstract which we are writing in the final version also is helpful in constructing the graphical abstracts and pitching the article to an appropriate journal. And of course, when we want to transform an article into a final draft, we want to know that which journal we will submit it to and what they are looking for, and we want to highlight those points in the article. So all these things after the initial draft go hand in hand, and I think this is appropriate to fit them together and discuss them quickly. um, and yeah, then the next time also what I can do is we can quickly start with the basic list of documents which I think are necessary for an article to submit, and what are its general attributes, so what should be included in those documents. And then of course we can discuss about them, and I can learn from others as well, so what they think and how they do it, because I feel that that is the most important point of how the article will be received by the research community, by the editors, reviewers, and also if it is published by the readers. So if you, yeah, how you make the case, how you make the final version out of that data. So yeah, then we can discuss that. Huh?
Yeah, so I have to submit this week one paper. I yeah, I will keep it in mind and make my notes, and maybe I can give you
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
information about how it worked.
Yeah.
And next
Super.
meeting, and
Yeah.
yeah, how, yeah.
Yeah, and in the last week we got one article accepted in Sri Research International, and then basically acceptance is one thing and proofread is another thing, and then there are several documents in the middle. So I have a list of very fresh documents with me as well, so I can also share a few things there. No? Yeah. Okay, then we will discuss transforming the initial draft into the final draft. Some of it we have already discussed, but just touch it. And then, of course, documents needed and how to submit an article. This is something which we will discuss the next time. No? Okay, then. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And yeah, see you next time.
Yeah, see you next time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye.
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 Bye.